She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
All right. You know, I love it when I have these doctors on that are sensible doctors. Dr. Paul, I know a little bit about you, and I see your sensibility and the way you do some social media and your website. But tell me about your path from medicine and where it got you where you are today, because it's not a traditional path, I would think, or not
No,
traditional where you are right now.
no. So I'm actually a career emergency physician. Spent 25 years in the emergency department. And what gets the press in the emergency department is the overdoses and the
Right.
gunshot wounds and the
Sensational.
traumas.
Right.
Yeah, but really, bread and butter for emergency physicians all day long, every day, is vascular disease. The origin of
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
often obesity and high blood sugar. So it is the heart attacks and the congestive heart failure and the strokes and the diabetic emergencies. And so after, staring at those issues for 25 years, I decided instead of being reactive to be proactive and try
Good.
and get out in front of some of that disease.
So it's really the functional medicine approach or the root cause approach. And if I think people ask more questions instead of going to the doctor, and I know they only have 10 minutes with a provider,
Yeah.
but saying, well, how did I get here? That maybe we could get some more answers. So you're a slim man. Did you ever have a time in your life where, you get the belt got a little tight and
Yeah.
you're going, oh, I could be a vascular issue myself?
Yeah, you go through that phase where you're raising kids and your days
Yeah.
are long and you don't have
Yeah.
time to take care of yourself. So I was never tremendously overweight, but about 25 pounds more than I am now. So, and then I basically found, low carb approach and a
Yeah.
functional medicine approach. And, once you make that lifestyle change, you stick with it. So,
Something you said, though, that's important. I think our society now looks at if we're not obese, then we need to keep our mouth shut about weight loss.
yeah,
And we really need to speak up more for those of us. Mine was about 15 or 17 pounds with intermittent fasting, 25 pounds. That's still what I would love to see your lab work during the height of that 25
yeah,
pounds and now, because let's talk about the lab work that changed during that time for you. So the scale wouldn't put you on the biggest loser,
right.
but your lab work, I bet your high sensitivity C-reactive protein has dropped tremendously.
Sure. All those parameters changed. And the interesting thing about low carb, and I don't know if you've talked on your show about some of the recent studies. The interesting thing about low carb is it really doesn't increase cholesterol. Sometimes it'll increase HDL, good cholesterol,
Good.
and it almost
Fine.
always, in my patient population, it almost always decreases triglycerides because triglycerides are formed from the conversion of blood glucose to fat in the liver. So
Yeah.
the triglycerides almost invariably go down.
We say, and I know you've probably said this too, stop blaming fat for what sugar's done.
Yeah, I've heard that on
Yeah.
your show, and it's
Yeah. And
absolutely
I
true.
think it's profound because,
Yeah,
of course, big food has a product or its products that are filled with seed oils, fake things in it. And that's what's driving, it's that box of Rice Krispies and granola that you're having.
yeah.
It wasn't the steak you had for dinner last night.
No, no. Actually, one of the nice phrases I like to use with my patients related to fatty liver disease is fat doesn't cause fatty liver disease. Carbs cause fatty liver disease.
We need to call it carby liver disease then
We do. We do.
instead of FLDS, right?
Yeah.
No, FLDS, that's the
Yeah.
Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. See,
Yeah.
I'm getting my cults combined now. I'm confusing my cults with my diet obsession. But fatty liver disease, FLD,
Right.
non-alcoholic. That's what they call it, right?
Non-alcoholic
Non-alcoholic.
steatohetatis
Yes,
hepatitis,
that's
NASH.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's true. We have to look at it that way. So, I have this all the time that I almost have a button on my phone that I just send them the science that I know. But what is it you say to people if you start saying things that sound crazy, like you need to eat more meat? And they'll say, but or I tell people to eat, well, Robert Kilt says bacon, butter, beef, and eggs.
Right.
Well, eggs have
Yeah.
been vilified.
Yeah.
Butter's been I mean, all those things have been
It's all been
vilified
vilified.
for
Yeah.
50 years. And they say their next question always is, but Lisa, what about my cholesterol? So
Yeah.
let's just break it down. Isn't that the heart health hypothesis? Isn't that what that's called, or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. For most of the patients that come in my office, insulin resistance is a much, 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 much bigger issue than
That
cholesterol
was four
is.
muches, like
Yeah.
much, much,
Yeah.
much,
And
much.
all
Like,
of them were warranted.
I know, I totally agree. Lots of exclamation points.
Yeah. Yeah, so people come in and they've been focused on cholesterol so long because the food processing industry and
Yeah,
the reduced fat, low fat
yeah.
industry, and of course the pharmaceutical industry has
Hmm.
told them that's what they need to worry about. But look where that's got us over the course of the last 50 years since the food pyramid came out. And I know a lot of this has been reviewed on your show before,
Say it
because I
again.
yeah
Say it
well
louder for
well
those in the back. I don't care.
yeah. So what happened is, the food pyramid came out in the early 1970s, and we were told to reduce our fat and eat low fat, and we almost overnight, within a decade,
Oh,
went
yeah.
from 50% fat in our diet to 25% fat in our diet, and from 25% carbs in our diet to 50% carbs in our diet. And if you look at the curves from that time on, the first curve you see go up is the obesity curve because we
Hmm.
gained weight first.
Hmm.
And then about 10 years after that, the diabetes curve starts going
Wow.
up in terms of prevalence. And that's what you would expect. First, you become overweight, then
Yeah.
insulin resistant, and then you become diabetic.
Yeah, well, Dr. Ben Bickman, the
Yeah.
metabolic
Brilliant guy.
researcher,
Yeah.
he is. He says that actually, you know, it, diabetes, we know diabetes and insulin resistance run hand in hand. But he said if someone was checking your fasting insulin 15 years ago, because I'm a health coach, I often have people say,
Yeah.
I'm not diabetic, yet they
Yeah.
weigh 100 pounds more than they want to be sitting in front of me, right? No judgment.
Right.
I'm telling you the
Yeah.
facts of somebody I'm meeting with. And that's when Dr. Bickman says, had someone checked their fasting insulin 15 years ago, they would go, oh, but I'm insulin resistant. And that the next step on the yellow brick road from insulin
Right.
resistance is the diagnosis of diabetes. As a physician now, I'm just a lowly health coach in Arkansas. Do you tell people that fasting insulin is just a must of lab values?
So I do fasting insulin levels on every one of my
Good.
patients. All of them are getting in their doc's offices the cholesterol levels before they
I
come
know.
to me. When really a more important test, I believe, is the fasting insulin level.
Right.
And have you talked about HOMA IRs on your program in the
No,
past?
I've read a little bit about that, and I've heard Dr. Bickman talk about it. That's a great time to do a deep dive on that. Explain that to me.
Okay. It's actually not that complicated to understand. HOMA IR is an acronym, HOMA-IR, and it stands for Homeostatic Model of Insulin Resistance. And it's just a formula that's used. But what you do is you go ahead and you get a fasting insulin level and you get a simultaneous fasting blood sugar, because there's a relationship between
Okay.
those two.
Okay.
Because if your insulin's up a little bit, it should be forcing your blood glucose down, because, excuse me, it should be forcing your blood glucose. I almost
Right. That's
misspoke.
right. Yeah.
If your
So the
fasting
insulin
insulin's up,
comes out, and its
yeah,
job is to push the glucose to the cells.
push the glucose
Okay.
into the cells. So if your pancreas is working hard, cranking out a lot of insulin, trying to push that blood glucose into the cells, and the organs, let's say muscles, I always like to use muscles
Yeah.
as an example of that. It's the best one. If they're resisting that insulin, that's where the term insulin resistance comes from. The organs are
Got it.
resisting that insulin. They aren't listening to that insulin. Then what happens is you have a higher absolute level of insulin resistance. So it's that relationship of fasting insulin level, simultaneous fasting blood glucose. If your insulin level's up and your blood glucose is up a little bit, then that means the insulin's not doing the job and you have insulin resistance. You plug those two numbers into a formula and you get a number. And it's
Okay.
just a number. It doesn't have units associated with it. And basically, if it is over two, normal, no insulin resistance is one. 1 to 2 is maybe just a little bit of insulin resistance. 2 to 3 is moderate. and it goes up from there. And I've had patients that have been metabolically healthy and come in, and they've had a HOMA IR of 0.5, and I have had patients come in that have had a HOMA IR of 25. Just means
Wow.
bad insulin resistance.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I've been seeing, so as we age, because I'm 100 years old, I say I'm 60, but as I age, I sometimes notice that even though my fasting, and I'm just using me as an example because I'm here, and
Yeah.
it's we're just chatting. My fasting insulin's like 2.2. It did get to 1.1 during a 5-day fast.
Okay.
It was the middle of the 5 day.
Good.
It was day 4 of the 5-day fast. Well, it was not fun. My glucose was 52. It was too low. Like,
Yeah.
it's not uh grins and giggles, okay, when you're doing a
Yeah.
5-day fast, but I did it for the deep autophagy, right? But
Yeah.
let's say my fasting insulin's still low. It's in the twos, sometimes three. But sometimes I notice when I test it, because I am a thyroid patient, so I do get labs about every 3 months or so, 3 to 6 months. My blood glucose might be 105.
Yeah.
Does that mean it was something, even though my fasting insulin's low, does that mean it was I just ate something in the last day? Because I go in fasted, obviously, and I do
Yeah.
long, I mean, not long
Right.
fast, 20-hour fast. So they're
Yeah.
long daily fast. Is that one number? That is a number that trips people up sometimes. Do you think it's kind of
Right.
a not that
Yeah.
important?
So, a lot of things can be going on there. One, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your show, the dawn effect.
Yeah, no,
That
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, you
I'd
you get a
forgotten about
little
that.
release of cortisol,
Yeah.
sometimes a release of adrenaline in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can get a little dawn effect. And I like to talk about continuous glucose monitors, and that's
They're
one thing I love about
yes.
continuous glucose monitors. You basically get a fasting blood glucose level every morning when you wake up.
Yeah.
So you
I would
can,
say that technology has a lot. That is really kind of the beginning of a biohacking obsession for people. I'm not going to do the aura ring and all that because I don't want to get obsessed then. I don't want to then be fearful at night. Did I get enough REM sleep? I don't need to obsess about anything else. I have
yeah,
children and grandchildren I still worry about. I mean, that's
yeah,
my job every day is to worry about
yeah,
them.
I get
And
it.
I can't
Yeah,
worry about my sleep too. But the two different times, the 2 weeks I've done the CGM, that data is so telling. And I think Dr. Paul, who it's telling for, is the person who says, I eat really healthy and I
yeah,
don't know why I'm 30 pounds overweight.
right.
They do 2 weeks on the CGM. They're like, one girl called me last week. She goes, a margarita sent me to 220.
Yeah,
She was like,
yeah,
I go, one margarita? She went, yes. And
yeah,
so let's break down what do we want to see. So if people listening right now, first, I know in Arkansas a provider has to prescribe, it's a
right.
prescription to get a CGM. I don't know if there's any other
Yeah.
way in other states.
No,
It,
no, there aren't. You
okay.
have to have a prescription. Can we talk first about what a CGM is
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
how I think it should
absolutely.
be used?
Yes.
Okay, so I assume most of your listeners are familiar with this, but a CGM, we use that acronym, is a continuous glucose monitor. And that is those devices that you see on the back of people's arms,
Hmm.
mostly diabetics, because
Yeah,
these
that's true.
devices were originally utilized to guide insulin use. So basically, making sure your blood sugar's not getting too high, when you should administer your insulin, etc. But I very, very strongly believe that the use of those devices should not be restricted to only diabetics.
Right.
You put one on, stays on your arm, as you mentioned, a couple weeks, puts a small sensor under the skin. When you put it on, doesn't hurt,
You can't
doesn't
feel
hurt.
it.
Yeah, you
Mm-mm,
can't feel it. Yeah,
mm-mm.
doesn't hurt while you're wearing it. And that sensor equilibrates with the blood glucose level that's in the nearby capillaries, picks that up, and then that is transmitted from the sensor on your arm into your smartphone app, in which you can follow your blood sugars. And also, if you choose to, your physician, nutritionist, health coach can also follow your blood sugars as
Oh,
well. So
okay.
we follow those numbers remotely um, as well. And the way I use these devices is first a diagnostic phase. So patients come in, we do a 2 week diagnostic phase in which we put a device on their arm. We'll get their blood drawn so we can check their fasting insulin level simultaneously with that. And I tell them, don't change a thing. Just eat your
Okay.
regular
That's
diet
fair.
for 2 weeks. I just want to see where you live. And then we monitor that data. They come back after a couple weeks, and we go through all that data. And the change that this can have on people is remarkable. When they see for the first time what they're eating is doing to their blood sugar level, as several of my patients have put it, I can't unsee that. Um,
Good.
yeah,
It's a
good.
horror movie.
Yeah. And for some of them, even that 2 week period can be life changing, because for the first time they understand, for example, that they have insulin resistance. Or I have people come in and they say, yeah, I'm just a little bit overweight. This is the typical patient. I just want to lose 20, 30 pounds. That's really the goal. And we do this assessment, and they see their spike in blood sugars to 180, which is pre-diabetic, so they are pre-diabetic at this point. And then some of them will be spiking sugars, as you mentioned with your friend,
Yeah.
220, 230. That's actually a diabetic range. So people come in and realize for the first
Oh.
time that they have these metabolic health issues, and again, it can be life changing in terms of how they
Yeah.
want to change their habits.
Okay, so we have to remind people, because I'm very visual. And once I understood that insulin was kind of unlocked the key to get
Right.
glucose into the cell. So then after we eat, what is the normal trajectory of insulin those first 2 hours and then after a 2 hour time? Kind of explain that.
Okay, so it depends to some degree regarding, of course, what you eat. Sugar gets absorbed and becomes blood glucose in your system almost immediately. So you're going to
Okay.
get a high spike, and then
Okay.
it's going to come down. And related to that, sometimes what happens is people get the high spike in blood glucose, and then they immediately get a spike in insulin, because insulin's trying to do its job, forcing
Right.
that blood glucose into the cells. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that insulin overshoots the mark, and then of course you get the infamous sugar crash, where you
Mm-hmm.
spike and
Mm-hmm.
then it goes. And that change, that variation from one level to another, can be almost as harmful as having high blood sugars persistently. That
Yeah.
variability
Mm-hmm.
that takes place, and of course that's what gives you the brain fog and the lack of energy.
And
And
shaky and oh.
yeah. And then once we stabilize those curves for people, they feel that much better, whether it's just low carb or keto. But this is my very simple physiology lesson on carb metabolism, if I may I
Sure.
kind of. so,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't try and overcomplicate things. Emergency physicians are just like, let's understand things simply, let's problem solve, and let's move on. When you eat a carb, unless it's fiber, sugar, or complex carbs, it basically becomes blood sugar in your system immediately. So you have probably seen Dr. Unwin's graphs of,
Mm-hmm.
this much Cheerios equal this many
Mm.
teaspoons of sugar. So it just becomes blood glucose in your system immediately. When that blood glucose up, then the insulin goes up. And so far, so good, because we're forcing energy into our organs. But when the blood sugar is high persistently, because we're eating carbs persistently, then that's when you get that insulin resistance. The organs, the muscles start saying, hey, we aren't going to listen to you anymore, insulin. And then, of course, what happens is that extra blood sugar, which can't be absorbed by the organs, goes to the liver, gets converted to fat, and then, of course, gets deposited viscerally around the middle. So
Right.
in a nutshell, what I do with my patients is, using CGMs, I teach them to lower that carb intake. So then the inverse process occurs. So you have less blood sugar being absorbed. Now the organs are looking around saying, hey, we want more insulin. We want more blood
Mm-hmm.
glucose. And the blood glucose isn't there. So the organs are still saying, but we need energy. Our muscles need to contract. Our brain needs to think. We need energy. Where are we going to get that energy? Oh, looks down at the middle. Oh,
Yeah.
there's that fat there getting
Mm-hmm.
broken down into fatty acids, and that will be used as energy. And of course, the side effect of fatty acid breakdown is ketones, and that's where the term keto comes from.
So is that the magical process of gluconeogenesis then that happens?
Right, because gluconeogenesis basically is the process of glycogen being stored and then broken down. And so you want to go ahead and deplete that glycogen as much as possible so you can start burning fat. In a very simple visual for this, I suggest that my patients consider the bear that's out in the fall fattening up for the winter, voraciously consuming
Mm-hmm.
roots and berries
Mm-hmm.
and fattening up, and then they go and sleep for 4 or 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
And they burn fatty acids during that time. That's what I'm trying to do with my
Oh.
patients. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is most Americans have food at their fingertips
Mm-hmm.
24/7. So we don't hibernate and not eat.
Mm-mm.
So we have to control what our intake is during routine days, and the way to do it is with a low carb approach that will allow you to burn fatty acids so you can get slender just like the bear does while it's hibernating.
I love to hear Dr. Jason Fung talk about the
Oh,
timeline of obesity. He said in the 50s, you may have had a television set, you may not, and you would. He said you ate breakfast maybe at 7 in the morning. You watched whatever was you maybe the news was on at 5. You watched TV at dinner. You turned it off because there really
yeah,
wasn't much at 5:30. And he said so you fasted at least 12, 14 hours and no one talked about it.
yeah,
No one had a bowl of ice cream in front of you. You didn't run to get fourth meal at Taco Bell. He said, so that was one part of the trajectory. He goes, was when, um, actually, he said in the 60s and 70s, he said, then low fat started interrupting things. So he said, then we started cutting our dietary fat and we started having more accessible food. And we're the fattest we are, but we're the least nourished we've ever been. There are more gyms
absolutely.
than we've ever
Yeah,
had. There are more diet
yeah,
centers, and we're fatter than we've ever had. So, I mean, it just goes back to the basics of. I mean, he's obviously a low carb
yeah,
proponent, but that's how he introduces fasting. And if you've ever heard his story about how just as a nephrologist, how he came to the realization that these type 2 diabetics were handing in their food diaries, they were doing everything right, and he just realized, what is it? He said, we're going to go back to basics. So
yeah,
what's your opinion then on fasting? I can't imagine you not being pro fasting, but
yeah.
you have your own opinion.
Yeah, so the components of a program to help people get metabolically healthy and lose weight or low carb, which we just talked about, and whether low carb or keto, depending upon where you want to go with that. Um, and then the second leg of the stool is intermittent fasting,
Yeah.
and I have all my patients do that. Some people come in and they haven't, they've never gone longer than 8 or 9 hours without eating something. And so we start gradually with them and we work with them to a 12-hour fast, 14-hour fast. And then I would say most of my patients are on a 16-hour fast or a little bit longer where they have a 2 to 4 hour eating window in the
Hmm.
evening. That approach. Occasionally, some will do longer fasts. I don't mandate that. It has a lot of value, as you just mentioned, related to the autophagy and really driving your insulin level down low. But so we incorporate fasting, but we tailor it to what the patient's needs and, quite honestly, abilities are.
Well, I guess we are short-sighted in our thinking what our bodies can do because we were told for so long not to get hungry and that we need to put another log on the fire,
Yeah,
that those first people when I was first introduced to fasting and my son just told me about it, I almost had to take to the bed. Said this cannot be possible. I
yeah,
cannot go. I'm a thyroid patient. I have hypoglycemia. I can possibly not go more than 19 minutes without, feeding myself.
yeah,
Um, and my favorite ones are the people who say after, and that of course after they fat adapt. The first few weeks you are glucose dependent because of what you've
yeah,
trained your body to do.
yeah.
But let's
Keto
say
flu. Yeah,
after about 4 or 5 weeks, you switch over. Dr. Bert Herring talks about, the fat adaptation. Other doctors have too. Um, and, and you have metabolic flexibility. And all of a sudden, those are the people who come to me, Dr. Paul, and say, I got so busy at work today. I went 22 hours and
yeah,
you're not writing my obituary. Like I
yeah,
did not
yeah,
die. I
yeah,
go, isn't it amazing? And they'll
Yeah.
say, and I feel so much, I love hearing that. I feel
Yeah.
so much better. And isn't it crazy to think that we really do our best work in the fasted state, including test taking, focusing,
Absolutely.
on and on and on. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the opposite of what we've been told. So we sound
Yeah.
like outliers, but we're really not now. Do you feel like the medical community is adapting fasting as part of a protocol for
Uh,
healthy living?
very, very slowly.
Really?
Medicine changes very slowly. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
there's a group of us metabolic health docs out there, that are, of course, embracing this. But, for most of the primary care docs in the office, it's tough. So actually, let me touch base on that. When I got out of my residency, mid 80s, docs were still in kind of their own offices, their own, small
That's
group
right.
practices.
Yeah, that's right. You were not owned by conglomerates yet.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And basically you were to some degree a small business person,
Yep.
maybe with a few colleagues, and you were running your business, and your relationship with your patients, I think, indicated that. But what has happened, of course, over the last 25 years is, or longer, I should say, is there's been the corporatization of medicine. So
Hmm.
most of them don't like it, but most stocks are working for large health systems,
Hmm.
or companies that trade on Wall Street.
Hmm.
And it's just what you described. It's the 20 minutes, and they're behind the computer
Hmm.
typing, because they got to get so many elements of their history and present
Hmm.
illness, and review of systems, and physical exam. And so they're relegated, and they don't like it. I got a lot of friends that are primary care docs. They're relegated to disease management, which is just, well, we're gonna tweak your diabetes medicine. Oh, we need to bump your cholesterol
We're
medicine
gonna
a little bit.
manage. We're gonna
We're
manage
they're
your.
managing
Hmm.
disease, where they
Yeah.
aren't
Oh.
reversing and preventing disease. And so that quite honestly, with my background as an emergency physician, I don't have a primary care background, but that provides me an opportunity to provide this service to patients that they have difficulty getting elsewhere. And I'm not bad mouthing the primary care
Oh,
docs.
I know
They're
you're
the
not. No,
backbone of American
absolutely.
medicine, but they are not given the time to do the job that they want to do anymore.
Well, I think the one benefit of an ER doctor is nothing shocks you. I mean, trauma. I mean, you just soon see trauma as much you would see, a beautiful field of flowers. I mean, you guys are faced by nothing, and you're immediate problem solvers.
That's right. That's what we do.
So
Yeah.
you knee jerk, you're like, okay, this is the issue. This is what we need to do. So
Right.
really, the best person to be in this type of medicine of even the functional medicine approach, and I don't know if you call yourself a functional medicine practitioner. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter,
Yeah.
but you
Metabolic
have the
health. Yeah.
mind.
Sure.
Okay, you have the mindset of,
Yeah.
well, what? How did you get here? You're at the emergency room. You have a gunshot. Well, what happened? Who? Someone shot me. Where was he? Standing over there. Okay, it's you want to know the facts so we can get to how this we got in this mess we're in.
And the solutions are very pragmatic. I mean, for knowledgeable people now that understand metabolic health, it's low carb, intermittent fasting,
Yep.
and then the third leg of the stool is strength training. And I
Oh,
assume you
absolutely.
probably, yeah.
Yeah, let's
So,
talk about that because
okay,
I have a new neighbor moving in. I was almost late to this, and I talked to him, and
good.
we knew each other because of jazzercise. He said, "Do you do jazzercise?" And I said, "I did," but I said, "Now I'm lifting weights 3 times a week instead." I said, "More on
Yeah.
that another time. I've got to go do a podcast." So let's talk about how important it is for our metabolic health, and really, as we age, our health to increase that muscle because of sarcopenia and other things.
Absolutely. So we start behind the eight ball as we're getting older, because we're losing about 7% of our muscle mass every decade after your
Wow.
early 30s. So think about that. The numbers really can be, quite staggering. By the time you get older, 35-40% of your muscle mass. And I see that in the emergency department. I see people that basically fall just because they don't
Mhm.
have the leg strength not to fall.
Wow.
So it's important for that reason. And the reason it's important in my patient population is because if you increase that muscle mass, you're increasing the receptivity of the insulin receptors on your muscles, the sensitivity and the volume of insulin that they can absorb. So they absorb more insulin, which helps lower your blood glucose. So it helps reverse insulin resistance. And so
Okay.
that's a very important component. By increasing muscle mass, I'll just say as an aside, even though I don't think any of us are calories in, calories out people here, you are increasing your basal metabolic rate a little bit, not only when you're working out, but when you're at rest because you have a higher muscle mass. But the main reason to lift weights is muscle mass preservation and augmentation as you get old, and then to decrease your insulin resistance.
Well, in conjunction then with our basal metabolic rate going up, then actually our desire for food might increase, which is all normal.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
not a bad thing. I think that's what people are so afraid of hunger because we told them for so long to eat every 19 minutes. I think Ben Azadi says we really do eat 23 times in a day, meaning the sip of cream in the coffee, that's eating, because that is eating to
Yeah.
your body, right?
Yeah.
So we're so afraid of hunger that when we do get, I know, I'm slim, I don't need to lose weight. There are days I'm hungrier than days I'm not. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's probably because I lifted weights the day before or something else.
Yeah.
Let's address that hunger, it's not a bad thing. If you're listening to
No.
your body and you're metabolically fit, then
Yeah.
hunger is just a sign that the fuel tank is low.
Right. And if you can train yourself to reach for the protein and the fat,
Yeah.
if you need
Yeah.
satiation as
Yeah.
opposed to the carbs, that will help. Hey, can I bring up one other thing related to muscle mass? And I don't know if you've talked about this on your
Absolutely.
show, but I'm going to go there, and you tell me if you want to talk about this or not. But these weight loss drugs are all the
Oh,
rage
that was my
now.
next question about the
Okay.
peptides. So go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Well, so I wanted to talk. I mentioned that, and then we can go wherever you want with it. But
Okay.
in the context of muscle mass,
Okay.
when you lose weight, and especially on these medications, you look at your midsection getting smaller, and you think, oh, that's great, I'm losing fat. But
Yeah.
you aren't only losing fat. At least 25% of what you're losing is muscle mass. And one of the big messages I try to get out there to people that want to be on these medications, and I do think they have their place. We
Yeah.
occasionally we can
Sure.
talk about that once you have your other lifestyle changes in place. Is you've got to be lifting weights so you don't lose muscle mass while on these medicines.
They really
Anybody
have to do it then.
really, it's
Okay.
really important. It's really critical, especially in middle-aged and older women because of the
Mm-hmm.
relationship of muscle mass and osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The inverse relationship, I should say. Increased muscle mass prevents osteoporosis. But anybody that's on the GLP-1s, Wegovy, Ozempic, semaglutide, Mounjaro, needs to be in the weight room.
Yeah, I've seen the statistics of the muscle loss. So then muscle loss is what is you're saying that is such an aging characteristic. So though you might be slim, you might have legs that aren't strong enough to hold you up, and then you fall over, you break a hip, and it could be downhill from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to carry this a step further, in terms of muscle mass, about 55% of your muscle mass is below your waist. And being in the emergency department for 25 years, mobility relates to how much strength you have in the
Yeah.
lower part of your body. And so making sure you're integrating lower extremity strength training into this process is absolutely critical just to maintain your mobility long term. So, the old saying, I'm sure you've heard this, don't skip leg day. That's
Yeah, right.
absolutely true.
So in fact, prefer leg day
Prefer leg day. That's
if you're going to
right.
do anything. Okay, so now I'm kind of thinking about Dr. Bickman's big thing is, prioritize protein, intermittent fasting, and lift heavy things.
Yeah.
Or he says walk 10 minutes after a meal
Yeah.
because try to mitigate the glucose,
Right.
to the muscle. So I've always, and I swear Dr. Fung has said this, that they all say they prefer um, lifting in the fasted state. Well, now it makes me wonder: should I be lifting 10 minutes after a meal?
Yeah, I don't, there's different philosophies on that. Some people feel when they're at carb cycling that they need a little bit of blood glucose in their system, so they will eat a
Okay,
little bit of carbs before they work out. I personally don't, I lift in a fasted state,
okay,
frequently. I think the important thing though is that your protein intake is commensurate with the amount of muscle mass that you're attempting to build. So, you got to make. Yeah, I mean, again, I simplify things. Again, emergency docs are very pragmatic, so let's
oh
not
yeah,
make it too
mm-hmm.
complicated. Get protein first thing in the morning. Get 30 or 40 grams of protein first thing in the morning. You've heard this, and
Yep.
and then try and get 30, 40 grams with each meal, and that will do it for most people. Even if you're spending a fair amount of time in the weight room. Now, if you're really going at it, you might need to supplement more than that. And I'm an advocate of protein shakes, though your listeners know you got to be careful because some items that are billed
Very.
as protein shakes are actually got a lot of carbs and sugars in them. So,
And you might even see seed oils or other things that they
oh yeah,
bind it with, or wheat or dairy. I mean, I, and I know Ben Bickman even said he and his brother might have started a protein shake company because we have been greenwashed, lied to, or whatever, they've promised in their product. So I haven't found one. Oh, there's one that I've used some, but I actually I like chewing my food. I like chewing and swallowing it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and I feel like I have more satiety to when I eat real food. So the dilemma I think I've run into as an intermittent faster at my age, based on the 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. So I'm
yeah.
5'8", I'm about 150. I don't even get, I mean, I don't even get to 100 grams of
It's
protein
hard.
because, okay, good. My food I eat is so high in satiety
Yeah,
because I eat an animal based diet. So
right.
that's beef, butter, bacon, and eggs. And that
Yeah,
means you're full easily.
yeah. You got
So
that satiety going.
yeah, I get to
Yeah,
maybe 75 grams and
yeah,
I just have to trust. And plus, I don't eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't eat till
right.
usually about 1 o'clock. And just because I'm not following a dogma, it's just the way that I live my life. So, how can you encourage people? I mean, do we need to do anything to try to get more protein? Maybe add a cup of
So,
yogurt to a meal or something?
yeah, I just think you have to be conscious of it continually. It's interesting. So my patients that come to me haven't been low carb before. We convert them to low carb. A lot of times we'll go, if they don't want to go keto, we'll go in the 35 to 50 grams per day range. Almost all of them do really well with the carb target, but almost all of
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
struggle with the
Yeah.
protein target
Sorry.
when we start talking about 100 to 125 or
It's hard.
or more grams a
Hmm.
day. And I'm sorry, I don't think there's any magic bullet other than to be cognizant of it. I encourage people to count their macros so they know what they're doing. Sometimes after doing that for a number of months, they'll get familiar with it and they'll have to be less meticulous. But protein is always a struggle, and
Yeah.
people need to be just in an ongoing manner conscious of it.
Yeah, and what breaks my heart is that mayors, the New York City mayors, trying to encourage Meatless Monday
Yeah,
in the New York City public schools. That's the last thing a growing
yeah,
child needs is to
absolutely.
skip meat that day. I mean,
Right.
unless they're having beans and rice and having complete protein. I mean, I don't know. I don't know many third
Uh,
graders that want to eat beans
Probably
and rice.
unlikely. Yeah,
Yeah, right. But
yeah,
they do want to eat a hamburger patty or,
yeah,
what, pepperoni and cheese, whatever it is. So yeah, I
yeah,
really hate. Oh, that's why politicians drive me crazy.
yeah.
Okay, let me go back to this is a dilemma a lot of my clients have. Lisa, my doctor, I ask for fasting insulin and then I look at their lab values after their doctors signed off on it because we just kind of talk about it. Glucose is always on there and A1C. And as we know, the king, or the smoking gun is fasting insulin, right? My
Right.
doctor said he couldn't order it without a CPT code. So one of my clients had me talk to their provider on the phone and she was Medicaid, so it may have been a little more challenging for her. But
Right.
I said,
Sure.
I don't know CPT codes. I can spell really well. I'm a good journalist, but I don't know CPT codes. So what we found out is that insulin resistance does not have a CPT code, but metabolic syndrome does.
Right.
Do you think that's kind of what they have to do is put, I mean, because the provider's on the phone saying, what code do I put on there? Well, because I'm not as insensitive as I seem. I wanted to say, well, she's fat and has high blood pressure, but I couldn't. And I said, what about insulin resistance? She goes, it's not on there. And she goes, but metabolic syndrome is. So is that what you
Yeah.
do?
That's what we use, metabolic syndrome. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
As long as, I mean, because we want people to get reimbursed, obviously, for any
Right.
cost to
Yeah.
find out there. It's just it's data. I mean, that's how I feel about the CGM. CGM isn't my lord, but it's data for the time that you're using it. Okay, so
Right.
and that same client was the one. She got a CGM that was so. In fact, had to beg the provider for it practically because the provider had to write the prescription. And she said those 2 weeks taught her more about what foods did to her because she said she used to go to she said I used to go to the Mexican restaurant and I ate the cheese dip on the table with the chips because they put it out there. And she was once
Right.
at the CGM, she said, oh, the fajitas will come first next, and then
Yeah.
I'll eat that. And I said, well, that's what we call a self-correcting error. That you understood that meal stacking. What do you think about that? The glucose goddess was the first person that kind of introduced us to that
Yeah.
concept about meal
Yeah.
stacking. How do you feel about that?
I encourage all my patients to do that.
So
Get
protein
your
and fat
protein and
first, right?
yeah, protein and fat first, and then followed by carbs. Um, I don't know if you need to be, a zealot about it. I think if you keep that general pattern in
Yeah,
mind, it's a positive thing. I don't think you got to sit down at every meal and make sure
yeah.
you're following all those rules. Special occasion is special occasion, family event or whatever. But I think to keep that general rule in mind is a good thing. And kind of that's kind of how I manage my patients. It's like, let's not overthink this. An example related to the macros
Mhm.
would be, I want you to keep your carbs down and your protein up. And I don't really care what you do with your fat. You don't have to count your fat. We do talk about
Yeah,
good fats and bad fats, which you've alluded to already with the seed oil issue.
yeah.
But two numbers, getting less than 35 or 40 grams of carbs in and more than 100 of protein, that's enough to deal with. And then, the other issues here, if you're intermittent fasting and strength training, are kind of, extra layers on the cake.
Oh, on the cake? Did you say cake? No.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So what I learned with that was when you start eating in a way that your body will love you more, you won't eat the cake first because it makes you feel bad
Yeah.
because your glucose will come up and down. And mine wasn't cake recently, but I'd eaten my lunch
Yeah.
of my animal-based meal, and then my granddaughter and I went to the mall, and she wanted to go get like some kind of drink at the place, one of the places there in the food mall, in the
Yeah.
food court. And so it was the middle of the day, and I'm not a soda drinker, so I thought, you know what, they had some kind of lemon berry drink. Well, even though it had been a few hours since I'd eaten, I sipped on it. My blood sugar, because I'm so now sensitive to this, it must have come up. It came back down. I had a headache within 20 minutes. I
Yeah.
felt shaky. I felt I felt so much worse by doing
Yeah.
that. The next time, I'll just get water.
Yeah. I mean, I frequently had that when I was eating more carbs and evening eating, the next morning. I mean, I felt a carb hangover
Oh
was
yeah.
worse than if you had a couple beers. It's,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
amount of carbs, your blood sugar spiking, your insulin spiking, that instability overnight. It's not worth it. So I don't eat carbs in the
No.
evening anymore.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. Um then I've heard people say that, what do they say? All food, or no, all carbs turn to sugar. So does that mean if you're eating broccoli and
Yes.
kale and steamed rice, so it all turns to sugar?
Yeah, except for the fiber that's in there. Fiber
Oh,
passes through you. So
okay.
what I tell my patients is fiber is free. Okay. But yeah, complex carbs become blood glucose. A little bit of fructose. Sometimes they
Mhm.
get absorbed to fructose into the blood, but the complex carb portion becomes blood sugar. And so that's, important piece of knowledge for people to understand. And once they understand that, they understand how they can control their blood sugar. So yeah, complex carbs. Yeah, again, I simplify things. Limit your carbs to this number. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily going to dictate to you, what your meal plan has to be or whatever. But yeah, the complex carbs almost, instantly in your gut, once they're absorbed, become blood glucose and fructose.
Where does alcohol then fit in a daily routine for somebody that's living this life?
So to simplify this concept as well, the way I ask people to look at alcohol is okay. So there can be carbs in alcohol.
Yeah.
With some distilled spirits, there's no carbs. But what happens is that alcohol is burned directly as energy as well. So basically, when you have that alcohol in your system, your burning of blood glucose and your burning of fat is taken offline because the alcohol is
Oh,
providing energy at
it's
that moment.
okay. It's prioritized, the
It's
alcohol.
prioritized,
I see.
exactly. And so even though it doesn't necessarily directly raise your blood sugar, it's taken blood sugar which would otherwise be burned, and maybe some fat around your middle which would otherwise be burned for energy offline. So you're burning alcohol at that time, and that's why moderating your alcohol use is an important aspect of this as well.
Yeah. And also, those of us that do bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, it's really not frowned upon, but just there are different pathways, as you know, for estrogen, and it has a greater likelihood to go down the estrone pathway for those of us taking BHRT, and it's just discouraged. So, and
Yeah.
plus, I've said it a million times, the sleep interruptions aren't worth it anymore.
Yeah, yeah, the
You know,
quality of sleep is not worth it.
Qual-
Yeah, yeah.
which quality of sleep then reflects your metabolism, your cortisol,
Cortisol. Yeah,
yeah, all the things. So because I was in the media so long, we often have the same hours as the ER doctors, and what happens in that situation is people then feed the media personalities like they do the doctors with a tray of donuts and chips
yeah,
so that we could get energy to go to the next thing, right? Now don't
yeah,
we know
yeah,
how that sabotaged our health
yeah.
then, and we
Again,
really felt
yeah,
our worst and had no idea.
yeah. Healthcare is kind of the worst. For years in the emergency department, it's like you kind of get your butt kicked all night. You're running around
Yeah.
all night taking care of patients, and then you reward yourself by ordering pizza. So, people in healthcare sometimes, are the worst in that regard. So,
Yeah, it's funny once you adopt an intermittent fasting lifestyle and if you're at something before noon and they have a tray of food, you kind of go, "Ooh, gross." Like I
yeah,
never think, "Well, I'm going to go get a donut." And I don't say that
yeah,
self-righteously. I'm just saying it is it's you just have no desire. I'd rather save not the donut, but maybe to eat food and have a bite of chocolate afterwards, but not to
yeah,
say because I'd still have some sugar in
yeah,
my diet. Okay, well,
yeah.
we've got to spend some more time on the peptides. So tell me what there are some providers who say that peptides are good things, but are they including semaglutide and all those, or is peptide what is the definition of peptide? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, peptides used in the usual sense is a general term that really talks about gastrointestinal hormones to a great degree,
Okay.
and how they're processed in the body. And so the GLP-1s, semaglutide, Wegovy, etc., are mimics of gastrointestinal peptides. And the way they act, their mechanism of action is generally threefold: slows gastric emptying, so your stomach stays fuller for a longer period of time.
Well,
you know, you,
oh, well,
you get the same
I
thing
got
by
it.
eating
Yeah.
fat. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Totally. No. Well, now I'm thinking I just saw the news report about people with newly diagnosed gastroparesis. So it's kind of
Yeah,
inducing motility and gastroparesis. That's not a good
yeah.
thing.
No, that's not a good thing. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. So that's the first mechanism of action. The other one we've already talked about, lowers blood sugar.
Okay.
So you're going to be burning more fat. And then the third is a direct hypothalamic effect on the brain. You know, Go ahead.
Now I'm thinking, so the hypothalamus is the epicenter of the brain that controls
Hunger center.
metabolism. So it's
Yeah,
communicating with that. That's where our cholecystokinin fires, and that's a satiety
yeah,
hormone. So then
yeah.
does that GLP-1 has the late emptying, so it then signals the brain you don't need any more food.
Yeah, I think it's a direct, really brain effect, a psychological effect,
Oh, oh.
but that really it suppresses hunger. So that's again, simplifying thing. If you think of three effects: lower blood sugar, decreased gastric emptying, and a direct effect on the brain, I think that gives you an idea of what GLP-1s do.
But the truth, Dr. Paul, is you're on them for life,
Well,
right?
so let's talk about that for a second. So there is a mania out there right now related to these medications, and any physician that starts a patient on them needs to have that conversation with. So now they're used so that I mean, get on the internet. You can go anywhere and have a 15-minute visit with a medical provider and get a GLP-1. So what I believe is that you have to institute all the lifestyle changes that we've talked about here. You have to go to low carb. You need to be doing intermittent fasting, and then you also need to be doing strength training. Um, I do think in certain populations, in a limited population, and I have a few patients on these medications, once those lifestyle changes are implemented, a consideration of those medicines is appropriate. Now, I know it's not a holistic approach. There is some recent data, even in the last couple of weeks, that indicates that there is going to be there's a decreased risk of cardiac problems and congestive heart failure long term in
Well, wait a minute. When
patients.
I saw that study, I said, well, of
Yeah,
course, because you've lowered their fasting
you're lowered.
insulin, the thing we're
You're
talking about.
absolutely, absolutely. But the way to use those medicines is in very low, limited doses, titrated up to a low amount, and then titrated back down over a determined period of time. Any doc that goes ahead and puts patients on those medicines and doesn't care if they're on it for the rest of their life, I think is making a huge mistake and
Mhm.
doing a disservice to those patients. So, the way I kind of look at this, Lisa, is the genie is out of the bottle on these medicines.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it is, unfortunately. I
Yeah.
personally, just knowing, staying up on the literature, this is crazy, but I think these medicines will become, for good or bad, mostly for bad, but will become the most prescribed medicines in the
For sure.
history of the world.
Oh, for sure.
More than statins.
Yeah.
So I think it's incumbent on a few of us, to carry the flag of using these
Hmm.
medicines prudently. And prudently is only after lifestyle changes, only at very low doses, certainly not getting to maximal doses of 2.4 milligrams for the semaglutide Wegovy Ozempic, and with a plan and a predetermined time to titrate it back down. So I realize that this is not mainstream in the metabolic health community yet, so I may be speaking out a term a little bit, and I don't use them heavily, but some people are going to get them, and whether they come to
Yeah.
me or
That's right.
they do a 15-minute visit online to somebody that's going to then see them every 6 months and prescribe them indefinitely. So one of I believe that if you have a knowledgeable practitioner that's very, very prudently using these medicines in a constrained manner for a selected minority of patients, that is reasonable, because sometimes they're just going to go somewhere else and they aren't going to be using them prudently at that point.
That's right. Okay. What can you do for them at dietdoctor.com if people reach out to you? And we'll have all that information in the
Okay.
show notes.
Thank you very much. So the name of my practice is Metabolic MD. So it's metabolicmds.com. We're on the Diet Doctor Provider website, and I'm
Okay.
licensed in Ohio, Indiana, Florida, and Arizona. Have offices in Ohio and Indiana, but a lot of our work is telemedicine anymore. And basically, the focus of my practice is metabolic syndrome patients, that need to make lifestyle changes. And then, of course, I believe in using the continuous glucose monitor so much that I wrote a book about it. I think I let you know
Oh,
that. The continuous glucose monitor revolution for non-diabetics, because I again believe these can be life-changing for a number of people. Diagnostically, to determine where they are with their insulin resistance and their blood sugar patterns, and then therapeutically to help guide diet long-term with either continuous use or sometimes intermittent use long-term. But I think, again, these devices are way underutilized in the non-diabetic population, and the use of this device for even a trial period can be eye-opening. And the last chapter in the book is CGMs change lives, because I've had a
mhm.
number of patients that once they see what that glucose pattern looks like, they can't unsee it, and it does change their lives.
Okay, people, go out and buy the book. Those of you in those nice states that he's talking about, you can reach out to him there. And thank you, Dr. Paul, so much for doing this. Great job. Very informative. I love a good ER doctor can dumb it down. And thank you for dumbing it down for me. Great job.
No, that's the level I operate on normally. So, it's just a good way to converse with people. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.